I want to share a story with you. This is from Frank McCourt, his book called Teacher-Man. As you note here, Frank McCourt is a Pulitzer Prize winning author. You might know such books as Angela's Ashes or Tis, both of which I believe were made into movies. Um, this particular story, though, takes place when he was a teacher. He taught for several years in a vocational high school in New York City. And so I want to read you one particular section of this book where he's telling a story that I think is particularly pertinent to us thinking about academic motivation, motivation to learn. Story goes like this. Mikey Dolan handed me a note from his mother explaining his absence the day before. Dear Mr. McCourt, Mikey's grandmother, who is my mother, 80 years of age, fell down the stairs from too much coffee, and I kept Mikey at home to take care of her and his baby sister, so I could go to my job in the coffee shop in the ferry terminal. Please excuse Mikey. He'll do his best in the future, as he likes your class. Sincerely yours, Imelda Dolan. P.S. His grandmother's okay. When Mikey handed me the note, so blatantly forged under my nose, I said nothing. I had seen him writing it at his desk with his left hand to disguise his own handwriting, which, because of his years in Catholic primary schools, was the best in the class. So there was Mikey, laboring with his left hand to disguise his exquisite Catholic calligraphy. This was not his first time forging a note, but I said nothing because most of the parental excuse notes in my desk drawer were written by boys and girls of McKee Vocational and Technical High School, and if I were to confront each forger, I'd be busy 24 hours a day. It would also lead to indignation, hurt feelings, and strained relationships between me and my students. I said to one boy, "Did your mother really write this note, Danny?" He was defensive, hostile. "Yeah, she wrote it." "It's a nice note, Danny. She writes well." McKee students were proud of their mothers, and only a lout would let that compliment pass without thanks. He said thanks and returned to his seat. I could have asked him if the note was his, but I knew better. I liked him and didn't want him sullen in the third row. He'd tell classmates I suspected him, and that might make them sullen too, because they'd been forging excuse notes since they learned how to write, and years later they didn't want to be bothered by teachers suddenly getting moral. An excuse note is just part of school life. Everyone knows they're fiction. So, what's the big deal? Parents getting kids out of the house in the morning have little time for writing notes. What they know will wind up in the school garbage anyway. They're so harried, they say, "Oh, you need an excuse note for yesterday, honey? Write it yourself and I'll sign it." They sign it without even looking at it, and that's the sad part. And the sad part is they don't know what they're missing. If they could read those notes, they discover the kids are capable of the finest American prose. Fluent, imaginative, clear, dramatic, fantastic, focused, persuasive, useful. I threw Mikey's note into a desk drawer along with a dozen others. Notes written on every size and color of paper, scrawled, scratched, stained. While my class took a test that day, I began to read notes I'd only glanced at before. I made two piles, one for the genuine notes written by mothers, the other for forgeries. The second was the larger pile, with writing that ranged from imaginative to lunatic. I was having an epiphany. I always wondered what an epiphany would be like, and now I knew. I wondered also why I'd never had this particular epiphany before. Isn't it remarkable, I thought, how they resist any kind of writing assignment in class or at home? They whine, they say they're busy, It's hard putting 200 words together on any subject. But when they forge these excuse notes, they're brilliant. Why? I have a drawer full of excuse notes that could be turned into an anthology of great American excuses or great American lies. The drawer was filled with samples of American talent never mentioned in song, story, or scholarly study. How could have I ignored this treasure trove, these gems of fiction, fantasy, creativity, craw-thumping, self-pity, family problems, boilers exploding, ceilings collapsing, fires sweeping whole blocks, babies and pets pissing on homework, unexpected births, heart attacks, strokes, miscarriages, robberies. Here was the American high school writing at its best. Raw, urgent, real, lucid, brief, lying. Toward the end of the term, I typed a dozen excuse notes on a stencil and distributed it to my 2 senior classes. They read silently and intently. "Yo, Mr. McCourt, what's this?" "Excuse notes." "What do you mean, excuse notes? Who wrote them?" "You did, or some of you did." I omitted the names to protect the guilty. "They're supposed to be written by parents, but you and I know the real authors. Yes, Mikey?" "So what are we supposed to do with these excuse notes?" "We'll read them aloud. I want you to realize that this is the first class in the world ever to study the art of the excuse note. The first class ever to practice writing them. You're so lucky to have a teacher like me who has taken your best writing, the excuse note, and turned it into a subject worthy of study." They're smiling. They know. We're in it together. Sinners. Some of the notes on the sheets were written by people in this room. You know who you are. You used your imagination and didn't settle for the old alarm clock story. You'll be making excuses the rest of your life, and you'll want to make them believable and original. You might even wind up writing excuse notes for your own children when they're late or absent or up to some devilment. Try it now. Imagine your 15-year-old son or daughter needs an excuse for falling behind in English. Let it rip. They didn't look around. They didn't chew on their pens. They didn't dawdle. They were eager, desperate to make up excuses for their 15-year-old sons and daughters. It was an act of loyalty and of love. You never know, someday they might need these notes. They produced a rhapsody of excuses ranging from family epidemic of diarrhea to a 16-wheel truck crashing into a house to a severe case of food poisoning blamed on the McKee High School cafeteria. They said, "More, more, can we do more?" I was taken aback. How do I handle this enthusiasm? There was another epiphany, or a flash of inspiration, or illumination, or something. I went to the board and wrote, "For homework tonight." That was a mistake. The word homework carries negative connotations. I erased and I said, Yeah. I told them, "You can start it in class here and continue at home or on the other side of the moon." What I'd like you to write is, I wrote on the board, an excuse note from Adam to God, or an excuse note from Eve to God. Heads went down. Pens raced across paper. They could do this with one hand tied behind their backs, with eyes closed, secret smiles around the room. Oh, this is a good one, baby. We know what's coming, don't we? Adam blames Eve. Eve blames Adam. They both blame God or Lucifer. Blame all around, except for God, who has the upper hand and kicks them out of Eden, so that their descendants end up at McKee Vocational Technical High School writing excuse notes for the first man and woman, and maybe God himself needs an excuse note for some of his big mistakes. The bell rang, and for the first time in 3.5 years of teaching, I saw high school students so immersed that they had to be urged out of the room by their friends, hungry for lunch.